Welcome to another episode of the Carolyn Glick Show. Since the beginning of the war, one of the things that has happened is that we've been forced to revisit a lot of things that we thought were axiomatic, that we thought were just clear and beyond dispute. One of the things that's arisen as a hot topic of discussion is U.S. military assistance. It was something that everybody just thought you could take to the bank, and it was great, and we didn't have to worry that the United States was going to be continuing to provide us with military assistance. And then we ran into the Biden administration, which imposed a partial arms embargo on Israel in the middle of a war for national survival and weapons slowdowns. And so everybody who's been following me has seen that I've been doing a lot of writing and thinking and talking about this over the past year. And basically my conclusion has been that Israel has to wean itself off of the American military assistance as quickly as possible. And I've spoken to a lot of people about it. And one of the main people that I've found is doing some groundbreaking work, not only in whether we need to get off of the dependence on American military assistance, but actually how we do that, is Dr. Raphael BenLevi. And he has a bunch of titles, and I'm just going to read them because I don't want to get them wrong. So Dr. Levy Ben-Levy is a research fellow at the Misgav Institute for National Security and Zionist Strategy, and he's the director of the Churchill Program for Statecraft and Security at the Herut Center's Argaman Institute. So first of all, I've been trying to get you on the show for a while. I'm glad we were finally able to make a date. So thanks very much to Dr. Raphael BenLevi for joining me today on the Carolyn Glick program.
Well, thank you, Caroline, for inviting me. It's great to be here.
All right. So I want to just dive into the whole issue of U.S. military assistance that you've been doing a lot of work on this for a while. And so first of all, let's just talk a little bit about the whole concept of military assistance, because yes, it's important to have American military platforms. They're the best in the world. We have interoperability with America. We have a lot of advantages that come from using American military platforms. But what's the deal with the assistance? Why does Israel receive these platforms without paying for them?
Okay, so I think it's important that we started to differentiate between the fact that we're using American manufactured platforms and technology and the question of who's paying for them.
Okay.
Right? Because a lot of the time when we start talking about, weaning ourselves off, dependency, people just straight up jump and say, wait, you're going to make your own airplanes now. There was the Levy project, it failed and all that. And I think this is why you need to distinguish. Because there's one thing that we might continue buying a lot of technology from the Americans. In the first era, I would say also jet engines and airplanes, right? The question is, are we going to take the coupons? Meaning right now, the Americans are not just sending us the material, they're also sending us essentially coupons that can be then used to buy from American manufacturers. And that's really what I'm talking about. We're talking about the military assistance, the foreign military financing, FMF.
Right, we're not talking about military purchases, which will go on. I mean, we buy things from the United States and we receive from the United States. So that there's a difference between purchasing tank shells, assault rifles, or even F-16s or F-35s, and receiving, like you said, vouchers, essentially, from the United States to go buy them from Boeing or Lockheed.
Yeah, we also need to differentiate between things that we want to buy from the U.S. and lots of things that Israel knows how to make on its own. Right? And some of those things, Israel does need to move toward making more on its own. Right? You could maybe differentiate between large combat platforms like, entire ships and airplanes and all that, which we would probably still want to continue purchasing, and between that and munitions, meaning and bombs. Right, and that's one of the most acute issues that came up in the last during the war. That Israel found itself in a situation where it did not have the manufacturing capacity to make enough of its own bombs, right? And that is something that Israel had. It is not something that it's not beyond our capability. We had that capacity. We had that capacity up until in the 1990s. It's really during the 2000s that Israel stopped ordering from its own manufacturers. And this did not allow them to keep on maintaining the production lines.
Before we get to that, I just want to start sort of in the beginning. There was a concept of military assistance. And where did it come from?
Okay, so, I mean, between the U.S. and Israel, so you can say that like this. In the 50s, or in the first decade or so, there was only economic assistance because the United States, Israel fought its war of independence under American arms embargo, right? The Americans weren't giving us anything, right? But there was a sort of political, they weren't selling us anything military, right? But there was a general affinity toward Israel, and there was a openness to help it economically. But there was no military assistance at all. Military sort of assistance in the sense that the U.S. would even agreed to sell Israel military hardware, started in the 1960s. There's Hawk missiles and then the big Phantom combat aircraft.
Right, the F-4s.
Yeah, and at the time, this was given under loans, meaning the U.S. loaned Israel money under relatively good terms in order so that it can purchase from American manufacturers these technologies and these hardware, and that was great. Israel seemed to be very happy with that. The loans started becoming assistance only in the mid-1970s. 1974, I think, is the first time where they actually defined it as a grant, meaning this is not a loan anymore. And from that time, it has just gone and grown. And every decade, pretty much, the amount of assistance of coupons or vouchers has grown. And from 1.7 billion or so in the 1970s, and then in the 1990s, it grew more. In the 2000s, it grew again, pretty much every decade. Now, I think it's important to explain also why or how this developed.
Why did it develop?
Okay, so in every step of the way, every time the aid was defined as grants or grew more, it was always within a context of Israel had a war, it gained territory, it had war achievements that it attained. This put it at odds with the U.S.'s ability to maintain its relationship with the Arab states in the world, in the region. And so the deal was Israel is supposed to come to some sort of terms under the idea of peace in exchange for territory, right? So we're giving up territory, and in order to somehow, and that hurt obviously Israel's security situation. It would give away strategic territory that it had gained under much duress. And in order to sort of compensate Israel's actual loss of security, the Americans agreed to add and grow Israel's military and add more aid. Now, this is true in 1979 in the peace accord for Camp David, right under Carter. Carter almost quadrupled the amount of aid in the context of to sort of compensate Israel for giving up on the Sinai, right? And okay, that deal. Controversial at the time. In some ways, people that really follow the details, it's still controversial, but it's sort of accepted in the Israeli consensus as sort of being a good idea, right? That was a good deal to make with Egypt and
with the United States.
And with the United States. I think the more problematic versions of this is in the context of Oslo Accords in the 1990s, right? And this is led on the one hand by Barak really at the end of the 1990s, right? But that's when the MOU, right? Up until then, the amount of aid was sort of decided on a not in a formal basis for long term. It was just negotiated depending on what other issues were on the table, negotiated with the administration
year to year
and passed through Congress. Yeah, whether it's year to year or some sort of deal for the next few years. There was no sort of long-term agreement that defined the amount.
In the Camp David peace accord with Egypt, the United States agreed to provide Israel with military and economic assistance, and then the Egyptians were supposed to get an almost equal amount, right? Wasn't that they received American military assistance as well as part of the deal, so that Israel gave them the Sinai, they got the Sinai, and they got free American military platforms.
Every one of these deals also came along with American funding for the other side as well. Also, the first MOU, which was agreed in 1999, and said in 2000, between Ehud Barak and President Clinton. Okay, and the real context here, you have to all remember that we're in like the later phase. The final phases. There's the implementation of the Y agreement, a Y River agreement. Israel is supposed to be fully withdrawing itself from areas A, and on the other hand, there's terrorist attacks. In Judea and Samaria, there's terrorist attacks. There's and Ehud Barak comes into the prime ministership saying, within a year, I'm going to bring peace deals with Yasser Arafat and Syria and Lebanon. all Israel needs to do is make tremendous offers and concessions toward Yasser Arafat, and then also negotiate on giving up the Golan Heights to Syria, and then also withdrawal from the security zone in southern Lebanon. And he has this grand plan on how he's going to remake the Middle East and bring peace
through
to the inner
Israeli
circle.
capitulation.
Yes, absolutely. Through Israeli concessions, very far-reaching ones. And he comes to Clinton and says, what I need, though, I need more money. I need more aid. I need more to build up also Israel's military to offset the security risks that we're taking.
It's also a political tactic for persuading the people of Israel that it's worth making these kinds of concessions.
Yeah, absolutely. Each time it's a way of allowing it politically to go through policies that otherwise most of the Israeli public doesn't actually support. Right, but it sounds like, look, we need this aid. Look, we're gonna build up our air force. We're gonna build up lots of other things. We don't have enough time. We don't have enough funding to fund this on our own. Look, it's a good deal, right? And when he proposes this to Clinton, even though this was a sort of a growth of a third or so in the amount of aid and a commitment for the next 10 years, right? And so it's a big ask, but Clinton feels like, well, he has to do it because Israel, if he does this, then Israel's going to go ahead and take a step toward real peace, right? This is the time. This is before what they call the Second Intifada. This is when a large camp in Israel, and definitely Israel's elite, really believed that we were one step away from peace, right? So the growing the aid.
Point out, I guess, just parenthetically, that this was already delusional because the number of Israelis who were killed in Palestinian terrorist attacks between 1993 and 2000, I think, was twice the number of Israelis who had been killed in terrorist attacks from 1967 to 1993. So twice the amount of years and twice the amount of dead in half the time. So that, it was already clear that this wasn't going the way that they had thought it was going to go. And yet, rather than reassess, they doubled down and they said, America, give us a bribe. That was essentially what it was.
Absolutely. And large percentages of the Israeli public could see that, right? But it wasn't yet accepted among the elite of the center left, right? Which the real breaking point is what they call the Second Intifada. Right, but at the time, not just implementing the Oslo Accords, also the withdrawal from southern Lebanon, right? And meaning Barak came to Prime Minister saying, we're going to withdraw from Lebanon in the context of a deal with Lebanon and peace deal with Lebanon that also forces with Hezbollah to withdraw, right? And then when he realized that there was no deal to be had and Syria didn't want to negotiate on that, he switched positions and said, no, we're just going to unilaterally withdraw. The IDF did not support the unilateral withdrawal from the security zone in southern Lebanon.
Because it was insane, as
right,
we saw.
Because they saw exactly what was going to happen, right? They wrote documents explaining that if we unilaterally withdraw and we're essentially surrendering the territory to Hezbollah, and then they're going to reestablish themselves on the border,
right,
and grow their power. But this is the next big step in the peace for territory concept, offset by larger aid. Meaning aid is built into this triangle of peace for territory.
So he does this deal, and what did we get? We got
the aid was raised from somewhere around 1.8 to 2.4 billion with a commitment of 10 years. Right, a year, right, with the commitment of 10 years. Now it's this period that Israel.
So it's from 2000 to 2010.
1999 to 2009. Or maybe even 8. There's also a different fiscal year, but it doesn't matter. It's an issue of a few months. Now it's this period that Israel essentially stops ordering its own munitions from Israeli manufacturers. And meaning over the 2000s or so, and
because it was cheaper to just get them with U.S. coupons in America.
This is the dynamic. The MOU does not say Israel can build its own bombs, right? It doesn't say that. But the dynamic is once you're in the system, and this is something that I saw myself in the Air Force headquarters, you have to purchase various components and various material, and you have a shekel budget. And you have an FMF budget, an aid budget.
Or military funding.
Yeah, then the aid budget. And so, as any socialist sort of oriented budget that that you don't actually pay for, you want to use it. You have to use it up, right? And why? And it's not that people aren't aware of the idea that we need to also hold on to certain capabilities, but there is no, or at least there is no clear policy saying this you can't necessarily give up on. And so there's just a slow trend of okay, well, if I have to order from the Israeli manufacturers, then I have to commit to a certain amount of purchases that will allow them to economically justify holding the production line, and I have to commit to it a few years in advance, and I have to keep on buying from them. And if I use the FMF money, I can just buy from the Americans whatever I want
off the shelf,
right? Because they have off the shelf, they have a larger scale, and it's just easier. And so in many different areas, but specifically in munitions, that was just what happened. And actual production lines, Israeli production lines, were closed during this time.
Right.
The Israeli state comptroller issued reports in 2012 and 2014 calling out the Ministry of Defense for not implementing on this issue. They actually did have some sort of strategic directive to maintain Israel's independent capability of building its own bombs. And it's calling out the Minister of Defense, saying, how could you let this capability
what was it?
ossify?
What was the capability? What was it that we closed?
Manufacturing production lines for munitions, meaning the bombs in the
The Air Force bombs that we're in a major shortfall for because the United States isn't transferring them to us for political considerations. We were able to build them before, and now we're dependent on the United States. These are ordnance that we produced that we're now waiting for a changing of the guards in Washington in order to receive.
Well, okay, so there's also it's a big technical world and lots of different differentiations, and there's the basic the part that explodes, right? The stupid bomb that's inside the spark bomb,
okay,
essentially. And that Israel was able to make, and that would, let's say, to conserve ground forces and regular artillery, and right, and it's also the basis
like 155 millimeter shells. Kind of?
Yeah, it's also the basis for precision guided missiles that the Air Force uses. But that there's an additional guidance system and other entire technology that it's built around the bomb, the simple bomb. And so in this period also comes along with the arising of technology for precision-guided missiles. But at the bottom line, Israel's companies do know how to make their own precision-guided missiles, right? There might be some differences between that and the JDAMs that we buy from the Americans, but the basic technology Israel is capable of making, right? And it just stopped ordering, and it stopped making it economically feasible for Israelis' own armed industries to produce these en masse. And that's what was closed. That's why.
What about the tank and artillery shells that we've been just with our tongues out waiting to get the next shipment for?
As to my understanding, that was also within Israel's capabilities. There is also an issue of scale, meaning how much does Israel need to order and then hold on shelf over time, right? And that's also related to what our assessment is and how often we're fighting wars. And you may make an argument that there's a limit to how much IDF could order from Israel's own defense industries. But I think that's not a reason for closing our own production lines, right? We need to hold them at the very minimum, at a certain minimum that we just let go in total. And if we have surplus in today's world, there's a huge market for munitions, and I'm not even talking selling to countries that we don't like. I'm talking to selling to pro-Western countries that we have good relations with. Or Western countries that we have good relations with. There's a huge market for these. So if Israel now rebuilds its production lines, and then it somehow has a surplus that we don't need ourselves, well, then it can go and sell them. The Americans might even want them themselves. Americans themselves are in a bind, producing their own munitions and getting to the point where they want to be in the next few years.
So there shouldn't be any concern about being left with production lines that we don't need, because the fact is that the market is already there for them, and that's why we need it, because aside from the political considerations that informed America's judgment when they slow-walked munitions to us in the middle of war or embargo munitions to us, the fact is that even if they had the best of intentions towards us, it's possible that we would have landed in a similar position because of the worldwide shortage in these kinds of munitions.
It's not just possible; it's still possible. Yeah. And you can imagine in the way that the world looks right now, a war between China and the United States over Taiwan.
So let's just go on for a second.
Sorry, I just want to say, in that context, if America finds itself in an actual fighting war
with
then
China,
with China, then it's not even a question of a policy. Do they want to pressure Israel to go into Rafah or not? They might not have the munitions to give us.
In fact, in all likelihood, they won't, because they didn't expand their production since the Russian invasion of Ukraine enough to even supply the Ukrainians, steadily. And so then we get invaded and we have this major war. So it's not clear how much they have, in their own stockpiles as a result of all this supply. But let's just go back for a second to the issue of assistance. Okay, because here what you were talking about, what you were touching on, the budgetary considerations of somebody who's purchasing in the Air Force, or somebody who's purchasing in the Ministry of Defense or in the Ground Forces Command or whatever, and they're thinking through shekel budget versus dollar budget, and how this distorted our own thinking. But now we're and then something else happened, which was that in the last MOU that we signed with the Obama administration, they gave us an astronomical amount of money in comparison to previous years of $3.8 billion a year, I think it is. But we had to increase it. We had to decrease on an annual basis the amount of those coupons that we were allowed to even use in Israel. So I don't actually understand. If we got $100 in the 1990s from the United States in vouchers, they allowed us to use those dollars in Israel. What did they
allowed us to use about a quarter of them in the Israeli industries and convert them to shekels and then buy from Israeli industries. And that was the situation in the Barak's MOU and in the renewed MOU in 2008 under Bush and Olmert. Right, but in the most recent MOU negotiations with Obama, that portion of the aid that was allowed to be converted into shekels, where the agreement was to phase that out, and so by today, that's essentially phased out altogether. So if you had made an argument 20 years ago that even though the aid is going mostly to the United States, it's also helping Israel build its own independent manufacturers because at least a quarter of it is going to us. That is not the situation anymore.
And it's not just that, because what's interesting is that you're saying that we shut down the production lines even as a quarter of that budget was used in Israel. So obviously it wasn't sufficient in order to justify maintaining those production lines.
That's what happened.
That's what happened.
Yeah, I think I would like to go back a minute to also Olmert, right? Because the same dynamic happened we're in the summer of 2007, okay? We're, 2 years out of the withdrawal from Gaza, okay? And about a month after Hamas's takeover of Gaza, okay? I mean, of the PA. Over for the Palestinian Authority.
And several months before he offered Jerusalem.
Hold on, that's exactly where I'm going. Hold on.
Okay.
And we're also 2 months after the Winograd report, which is the government committee that investigated the Israel's operations in the Second Lebanon War, and it issued a scathing report, very critical of the Olmert government. Okay, so Olmert is now coming to the U.S. in the summer of 2007. He has a very low popularity within Israel. Under his credibility is low after the Winograd report. Hamas just took over Gaza, which was like our worst nightmare after leaving Gaza in 2004.
Five.
And Bush, along with Condoleezza Rice, want Olmert to come to a huge conference in Annapolis, and where he's going to make this new peace deal, make a new offer of concessions. And he's going even beyond what Ehud Barak was willing to offer. And he's talking about a specific an actual Palestinian state. And he's also committed to Bush that even if the PA Abbas doesn't want to negotiate, he's going to then unilaterally withdraw from various parts of Judea and Samaria.
Just madness.
Although if you hear him talk today, he still believes that we were this close from making a deal, right? That peace was just around the corner. But that was the situation. But he didn't want a big international conference. He wanted some sort of closed door meetings where he could discuss it. And the Americans wanted a big international conference. And so here again, what can they do to offset the huge unpopularity of the idea that Olmert will then now go make these huge concessions toward Abbas? Well, the end of the MOU is coming up. We can come up with an announcement that we are not just going to renew the MOU for another 10 years, we're also going to enlarge it by a significant portion. And so it goes from 2.4 to 3 billion. And Bush and Olmert come out at that practically that same day with a press release saying Israel and the U.S. have decided to renew the MOU. Olmert has now a card that he can play politically within Israel that will offset his very low popularity, and the Americans have Olmert's agreement that he's going to come and make huge concessions, and if not, then unilaterally withdraw from territory, right? So even though there was no absolute quid pro quo, it doesn't say in the MOU ever that Israel has to do withdrawal from the territory, but this is a political negotiation. Right? At the end of the day, we're taking grants, we're taking the money, right? And it's true everything that people say that this is in the U.S. interests and it serves U.S. interests to make sure Israel is strong and all that. Yeah, absolutely fine. It's still grants, right? It's still us coming and asking for handouts, right? It's no state should want itself to continue being a welfare state indefinitely into the
Particularly
future.
when we have GDP per capita of over $50,000.
Absolutely.
But then the other question is, okay, but then we had another MOU with the seethingly hostile Obama administration in its waning days after they had already signed the nuclear deal with Iran that paved the way for Iran to become a nuclear armed state. After they had, humiliated Israel repeatedly, demanded, blamed us for the absence of peace with the Palestinians, and so many other things that they did to us, and the object of their hatred was Israel in general, but it was personified in Prime Minister Netanyahu, and then we signed an MOU that in many ways was even worse, in the sense that it took away the 25% that we could use at home. And why did we do that?
So there was a context here as well. First, you should mention that in 2013, Obama, on the one hand, he wants to start new peace talks, quote unquote, with John Kerry, with Abbas. And he's also just beginning to enter the more intense nuclear talks, which I mean, by that I mean he's about to offer a huge concession to Iran, meaning that he will eventually, that the final deal will allow them to continue enriching uranium, or at least hold on to the infrastructure of enriching uranium, which up until that time the policy had been zero enrichment. It was the UN Security Council's resolutions that Israel has no right to enrich, and Obama was about to... Iran has no right to enrich. And he was about to make that concession. And at the time, he said, he came to Israel and said, let's start discussing the next MOU. This is 2013. There's a few more years, way more. This is way earlier than it necessarily needed to be discussed. But he needed some sort of political card that he could play, something that he could give Israel.
So that he could pretend that he's pro-Israel when he's absolutely
so he can drag us into a negotiation and show that we're doing something, that he's also doing something for Israel. And so they actually began these meetings and discussions of what the MOU is going to look like back in 2013. When we became into the final run of toward the JCPOA, the Iran deal, and Israel had come out publicly against it, so the discussions on the MOU were set aside, right? And again, this is all very gentle in a way. It's not like explicit. It's not explicit. Oh, we're going to stop the MOU. And you're not going to get any MOU if you don't stop opposing the JCPOA.
Cass Sunstein called it a nudge, right? That they nudge you into conformity.
Okay.
Nudge you into compliance.
You can say that. And and then they were essentially put on hold until the JCPOA went through. And once it went through, then they went back to the negotiations and came up with the new MOU. The new context was, well, essentially, Israel it didn't pay in terms of territory, or commitment to giving up territory, but it paid in the sense that the United States had just made a huge deal.
Right, we're now in existential peril, and they're going to give us more money to make us feel better about it, right?
Right, or at least as a fig leaf to cover up the fact that Obama, made the deal with Israel's biggest enemy.
Right.
Right, and then as far as the actual terms of the MOU, they also insisted that we cut off the conversion to shekels, the 25% conversion to shekels.
So I understand why the Americans wanted it. Why did we want it?
The main reason why Israel has wanted it is because it assists Israel in building up its military. right? It's free funds, it's free stuff, right? And it's not that we don't need the stuff, right? So it's very difficult for someone to come and say, look, keep your money, keep your, if we want airplanes, we'll pay for the airplanes, and we'll deal with it. While at the same time, Israel has huge security risks and threats, and it really does need, and it invests in a huge amount of its own GDP, consistently over 4% in security. In the past year, it's been 6.5% of its GDP. So we already invest a huge amount in our own security. We do have real security threats. And so when you have the superpower coming and saying, look, we'll give you some of the stuff, then that's very difficult for people to.
So here's a question. In one of our earlier discussions, you and I, you explained to me that and also in a paper that you wrote about this, that one of the other considerations is that there are essentially two military budgets. One are the things that you can't touch, which are salaries and pensions and I don't know what, and the other ones is I can't remember what the economic term is, that you can that you shape every year, right? And so that also plays a key role in the financial considerations for the aid. So can you explain that a little bit?
Right. So just first a few macro numbers, right? As far as percent of GDP, in the 1979, the aid was equivalent to about 20% of Israel's GDP, right? And a similar percent of its budget. Of its state budget. It's all the whole state budget.
I mean, that's the difference between Israel being a poor country and being a rich country.
Absolutely. In the 1990s, the aid was equivalent to about 6% of Israel's GDP.
So 20 to 6?
Yeah. And today, it's equivalent to about 0.7% of Israel's GDP.
Okay.
Right? That's where we're at right now. So that's a huge difference, first of all. Just, before we get into the details of the budget and how it's constructed and what it would mean to wean ourselves off, broad picture, we're not in the same place as we were, not in the 70s or the 80s or the 90s.
Nearly what it was in the past.
Yeah.
Right.
As far as percentage of the budget itself, so it's more or less the aid is equivalent to about 2.5% of Israel's state budget, the entire budget, Taksiv Medina. Okay? And so
0.7% of GDP overall.
Yeah. That's the past.
So
the most recent
2.5% of the budget of the government budget. When you say that we spent 6.5% of our budget, is that the
on
2
security.
On security? Is that the 2.5 from America?
No, that's what
4?
Israel actually spends. I mean,
Okay, so it ended up being
Israeli
9%.
budget.
So
I mean, if you add the
American aid, then it ended up being 9%.
I guess, but we're not spending that, so I don't want to put that in the same term.
Okay, that's fine.
Right, but so that's where we're at now. So 2.5% on the one hand, it's not negligible, right? It's not nothing. On the other hand, when you look over a 10-year period, Israel's budget itself has grown by about that value, about that amount, almost every year in the past few years. Because as their GDP grows, as their income grows, and we have more money. Now, it doesn't mean that it will be easy to cut it out. And this goes to the point that you're saying that there's the flexible budget and there's the inflexible budget. So this relates to the entire state budget. So a huge amount of the state budget is sort of set into various commitments, whether it's paying off loans and interest, and also into various pensions and our
So it's the same thing as the United States.
Yeah,
it's debt servicing and Medicare and Social Security. But
it's also our hugely bloated public sector, right? With very strong
unions.
Social unions that it's very hard to renegotiate or change those budgets. Right, and then there's another certain percentage, and after that, I don't have the up-to-date stat on that, but it's a much smaller percentage that when they have the budgetary discussions every year that they're really negotiating about. Okay, so the defense budget is part of that is pensions and stuff, and part of the defense budget is that, right? Is part of that. So that 2.5%. I said you need to recognize the 2.5%. It's not like we can just totally rearrange everything and get rid of it. The 2.5% is a little bit more when you look at just the wiggle room. Having said all that, what I'm actually proposing in the various papers that I wrote and working on with other people is that we get to an MOU that defined. Well, we should still have a new MOU, right? And
Why?
It will define. Well, ideally, right? Ideally, because we're like a drug addict, right? We're addicted. Right, so a nicotine addict needs to be weaned off. Right, otherwise it'll bring various shocks to the system. It's not that we can't do it. I mean, there were shocks to the system, and during the Corona, Israel raised its budget. And now that's not necessarily healthy, but we did it, and we're still here, right? And the past year, we raised the defense budget enormously, right? So theoretically, we could also handle it, and we would still be here, right? But if I'm looking at how to do it smartly, the best way to do it would be come to some sort of agreement that over the next 2 years, same way we weaned ourselves off the economic aid, right? But that was decided to wean ourselves in the 1990s. By 2010, we were stopped taking it. We need to come to some sort of agreement that says, okay, from starting 2008, the current MOU will end in 2028, and some sort of agreement that says, okay, we're going to gradually lower the amount of aid until by the end of that next decade, by 2038, Israel will be taking zero FMF dollars.
So here's the question. I mean, there are a bunch of different ways to do it, and you in your idea, you say, okay, take either start at the baseline of 3.8 or, increase it because we have so much deficit spending now that we've been doing to pay for the war, and we need so many things. I mean, our everything needs maintenance or needs to be replaced basically after 15 months of war, and our needs are humongous. And so I guess there are a couple of ways of looking at it. You start at the baseline and you just deal with it, or you say, okay, look, Vice President Vance, who does not want to give a lot of military assistance to anybody, say, okay, look, this is where we are. This is the amount of money that we have to spend, next year, over the next 5 years, to refurbish our entire military, our Air Force, our Navy, and our ground force platforms. This is what we're going to have to invest. Now, the question is, in this universe where we're going to have to invest, $200, the question is, instead of a normal 100, would you be willing to give us a little bit more? We're already running deficits that are way beyond what we've ever allowed ourselves to run, or at least, over the past 20 years. And, what we're talking about is instead of giving us, the amount that you gave us in the past, give us more in the outset. And then as we move forward, give us less, because there's a real fear among policymakers, I'm sure, about the idea of weaning ourselves off Dafka now when, the whole army has to be refurbished, and we're looking at everybody, our son came out of Gaza the other day after his third stint in Miluim, and, instead of being able to go home, they're fixing all of the APCs. And this is like the 5th time that they've had to fix all of the APCs because there's nothing you can do about it. You're fighting. You're using them, and it's wear and tear, and it's war wear and tear.
Yeah.
So you just come to the Americans and say, we need money now up front. Because Bezalel Smotrich is going to look at the idea of getting rid of all of it, the finance ministry, and, he's going to have a blackout. I mean, that's the fear. It's that it's the enormous costs of rebuilding now, and we're doing it while we're still fighting.
Yeah,
it's
absolutely. So I agree that in the near term, we definitely need to invest more in our military budget and rebuild, reinvent our ground forces and maintain.
And the Air Force. I mean, look at our helicopters.
I'm even for building up our Navy. Okay, right. Definitely need to build up. But there's a few things to remember here. One is that we still have a few years to the end of the current MOU. Right, so that we're not even talking about that change, right? That's going to be 2028, and I don't know whether we need additional funds or stay at the same level and then wean off. That's a question of
where we are. Where we think we'll be by 2028.
Yeah, in 2028. So I don't know. Either way, I think what is most important, especially when we negotiate with Americans, that we are able to commit that whatever it is that they give us, gradually it's going to wean off, and by the end of the period it will be zero. Right, and the next MOU is only going to be dealing with the cooperative, mutually invested, mutual cooperative elements of this, where we develop various technologies together. And right, again, there might still be an MOU. Right, it's an MOU that defines. That's why I've called in my papers from patronage to partnership. Mm-hmm. Right, meaning it's not, and it's also very important to emphasize, because people also say when we talk about ending the aid, people think, oh, you're going to go and now align yourselves with Russia and China. You're going to abandon the U.S. It's like, no, that's not what we're talking about at all.
We're talking about stopping the handouts.
Yeah, stopping the handouts, that's all, right? And doing that, well, what I argue is that this will make us a stronger ally of the United States.
Right, because we haven't spoken about the price that we pay in terms of the moral nature of our of our relationship with the United States. I mean, it's one thing when you say we're your most important allies in the Middle East, and they're not giving us gifts. It's another thing when you say it and they are giving you gifts, because then they're saying, well, we're giving you all this money, and we hear it all the time in the discourse in the United States, whether it's in, the anti-Israel caucuses in the Democratic Party or the nationalist caucuses in the Republican Party, where they're saying, why are we giving all of this stuff? Israel owes us. They have to obey us because we're giving them stuff, and we're in this position of having to always, go through again the whole litany of why we're America's Air Force carrier. And instead of doing that, say, look, we're buying our stuff. We're not talking about handouts, and so that transformation of the relationship, to my mind, is in many ways the more important reason to end it.
Absolutely. It's also one of the reasons that I think it's almost in some ways inevitable that we're going to have to end it. Because in both parties today, you see people are more and more critical of the very idea of aid. On the Democratic Party, they sort of want the aid, but they want to threaten to end it in order to
keep it up, like Obama did.
Yeah, in order to push Israel into various policies that it doesn't want to do. Right, but they want to use it in a much more explicit way, and not just sort of in the
openly coercive.
Yeah, exactly. And in the Republican Party, there's more and more people who are look upon the very idea of aid negatively, no matter who it is, and even if they're open to giving it to Israel because they're fundamentally pro-Israel, right? But they don't like the idea of a country Israel's GDP has been in the top 30 in absolute terms of the world in the past few years.
It makes no sense,
right? We are ranked number 13th in GDP per capita last year, right? And so Americans, especially at a time of economic difficulty, are looking at this. Why is this first world country coming asking for handouts, right? The Israel is supposed to be, this, taking their own initiative, do their own fightings, independent country. That's why they support Israel. That is the Israeli ethos that Americans support. And we are undermining our own fundamental pool of support by continuing to ask for the handout. Right, and that's what it is. Even though it's totally justified in the Americans' interests, and then when you look at the big numbers, I heard recently a number that the amount of money that was given to Ukraine in the last few years is equal to all of the aid that was given to Israel since the beginning of the aid. Something incredible to try and understand. Meaning, in absolute terms for the United States, it's not actually that much, but it doesn't matter because it's their money.
It's the principle.
It's their stuff, right? Again, there's their coupons that we're buying from American manufacturers. This also ties into the issue of the defense industrial complex, because at the end of the day, it's Congress members buying stuff from American defense manufacturers and giving it to Israel, right? That's what we're talking about. And so that's also a more and more negative aspect for this.
And the fact that they approve it every year, and that every handout has to be approved.
It also, I think, the very fact that in Congress they have to argue about this again every year and sort of decide how much they're going to give, and then that becomes the elements of the budget become part of the general partisan discourse within Congress, and that makes Israel into a more of a political issue than it needs to be. Right, because then people feel, well, we're funding this, or Democrats that don't like what we're doing in Gaza.
Like our GDP per capita is higher than Britain's, right? And Britain is considered traditionally to be the United States' most valuable, important ally with a special relationship that is unimpeachable. And here we are saying we're more important today than Britain is, and on the ground, objectively speaking, that's absolutely the case. But we're acting like dependents.
Right. And not just that, also we need to notice that it's not obvious that, again, MOU we signed with the administration, right? It's sort of a declaration of intent, essentially. The people who decide to give us the money in practice is Congress, right? And when they pass budget laws, right? And we only need to look at over the past year what happened, that a lot of the time Congress is deadlocked,
so
right? They decided this particular year. Right, the administration wanted to up the aid as of November or something in the last year, but it didn't happen until almost the entire half a year later, because the budget discussions were locked on the tying aid into Ukraine, right? Aid to Israel, aid to Ukraine.
But that the administration was doing on purpose, because they knew that the Israel aid would pass and that the Ukraine budget wouldn't pass.
Perhaps my point is that it gets tied up into all kinds of other political issues in the United States. And that also makes it more difficult for Congress to even pass the aid in a timely fashion.
And it makes
when
it
you think we need
impossible
it.
for us to plan when we don't actually know when the aid is going to be approved and then what the political situation will be. I think that the main takeaway from the Biden administration is just how what it means to be dependent on a hostile administration, when everything is nice and smooth sailing, which, as you mentioned, it really wasn't ever, but if at least there's a sense that it is. I mean, the Bush administration was deeply hostile as well, and what are you going to do?
So I think in the long term,
And the Clinton administration,
Israel needs to reconcile itself to the fact that in the long term, it must move toward greater independence in funding its own military.
So why can't we do it now? Why when we're looking at the changing political situation in the United States, where our own friends are saying, "Why are you taking handouts from us?" Why can't we just say, "Okay, never mind, we won't"? What is it that stops Israel from just?
Yeah. Well, theoretically, I think we could, and we would still be here. It would just be more difficult on our own budget. It would put us under greater budgetary pressure. We'd probably take out more loans or more debt, and we would have to deal with it over the next 20 years, right? And it would also be more difficult politically within Israel to do that because it would be more of a shock to the system. So the greater shock to the system, the more we don't want to shock the defense establishment. And you can say whatever we want about how they were managed and everything that was managed. It's our defense establishment, right? We would rather do it gradually.
There's
stuff.
also
So there's a political issue that makes it a lot more difficult to say.
Can you add in your question? I want to just add one more aspect to it, which is the offset, which is increased domestic industrial capacity, which brings its own dividends, right? Because you're increasing your own economic activities, and so that it's been argued to me over the years that we've been having these discussions, that I've been having these discussions about military assistance for the United States, that if we instead take this money and we invest it into our own defense industries here, that actually the profit, or whatever you want to call it, would be greater, or the revenues would be greater. So I don't know.
There would definitely be revenue. There's a lot of calculations
so now you answer, I'm going to be quiet.
Yeah, more in-depth research that needs to be done, those specifics. But there definitely is let's say a dividend to be had for not taking the grants. Right, and one of those is our ability to negotiate Israeli manufacture of subsystems of the big platforms that we buy from American manufacturers, right? Because every big deal like that normally includes within the negotiation, okay, what do my domestic defense industry, what can I do as part of this huge project?
It's like the F-35.
Or the F-35,
the
right?
electronic warfare aspects.
Right, or we also did part of the wings and the helmets, right? So part of this happens already, meaning because American manufacturers are interested in having Israel doing parts of it that it has a relative advantage in. But we're still sort of hoping, we're asking, it's an ask, right? We don't have any leverage in negotiating because it's Congress paying them for us, right? If it's now us paying it for us, right, we would have a lot more ability to renegotiate or negotiate these deals in a way that we get more of they give us more of the subsystems and more of the part of the elements of that manufacturing, right? And this could be across the board. There's also maybe redirecting some of the aid into mutual projects, sort of the way that the ballistic defenses has worked and a few other projects, that it would just be some sort of fund that the Americans would invest in it, we would invest in it, we would do a sort of mutual or cooperative research and development.
When you think about it, Iron Dome missiles.
Yeah.
In the deal that we did for the joint development of the program, so we provided the technologies, and then they build them all in America, so that when we run into a problem and we're at a war, then we need Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez to permit us to get more missiles. Which
one
is
of the
just
reasons
crazy.
that happens is because we're talking about aid. That the same Congress people who are passing the law to give us the aid are also interested in having it be done in the United States. And why not? Why shouldn't they do that? They're giving us the stuff. Right? But if we are paying for it ourselves, then Israel would have more leverage to say, okay, well, we need to sort of divvy this up in an equal fashion to the way that we're both investing in it, right? And so there's a lot of dividends to be had in that aspect. There's also Israel's ability to export. It's a lot of the things that it develops. Not everything needs to be mutual. What we can do on our own, we can do on our own, right? And then, and again, I'm not saying that there are limits to who we would want to sell things to, like, for example, China, right? The reason, like, we shouldn't be selling defense technology to China for strategic reasons, not because of the aid, right? But there are other companies where we are, other countries that we are in more economic competition with the United States, with American manufacturers, and they feel that, wait a minute, we're giving Israel this money, and then it goes and competes with us in for big contracts.
Well, maybe the better idea would be, for it, I'm just throwing it out, would be if you said to President Trump, because he wants to protect reasonably American industries, the same way, even more perhaps, than Israelis want to protect our own industries. We would say to him, look, we're going to stop taking money from you, but we'd like to negotiate a trade deal with you that essentially gives Israeli exporters the same protectionism from you, essentially, that you also are willing to protect Israel's industries by saying, look, you're not going to slap customs on Israeli exports to the United States, that we're not going to start using leverage that we've used in the past to prevent open competition between Israeli defense industries and American defense industries when we're talking about competitive bids for the Polish market, which happened in the past, right? And that we lost contracts with European buyers because the Americans came in and said, you can't compete here, or, so if we could say to them, look, we don't want your money, but what we want is a fair shake in the international market, and that you won't use your bull in a china shop tactics to prevent our exports, that may end up being an offer that he would accept. We're not taking your money, but we want to compete fairly with you.
Right, so I agree. So there's some sort of export dividend as well to be had. But I think beyond all this, there's what I would call a security dividend. What do we mean by that? I mean, because of this is the way that the aid is tied into Israel's failed security concept, right? The conceptia, right? And all of that is related to this issue of territory, right? Because you could say since the 1990s, our broader, strategic idea, it was retrenchment, territorial retrenchment, right? Meaning, we're gonna, instead of having buffer zones and being, let's say, forward deployed, assertive, take the fight to the enemy's territory, chase them where they are in various buffer zones around Israel, which is what the Southern Lebanon Security Zone was, which was what our presence in Gaza was in many ways. Instead of doing that, around the 1990s, is Oslo and the withdrawal from Lebanon and from Gaza, we essentially said, no, we're going to now retrench, or as Olmert put it, להתכנס.
We're going to converge.
Yeah, the convergence. And then we're going to defend ourselves from beyond the border, right? From defensive lines. Now we're going to adopt a more defensive posture, where we're going to use precision weapons, standoff weapons, mainly Air Force and intelligence and high-tech based.
Sensors.
Right? Sensors various, to have defensive lines. And we're going to reduce our ground forces. And that is what became Israel's new way of, its security concept that led us directly to October 7th. Right, and that is, it's not that the MOU said you have to do this.
But it's important to say all components of that doctrine failed on October 7th. Every single one of them.
Yeah, absolutely. And all of those are. It's not that the MOUs and the aid said you have to do this, but like we explained earlier, it's part of the triangle that allowed Israel to take these risks and change and leave territory and essentially surrender territory to terrorist organizations.
US, Israel, enemy.
Meaning Israel surrenders territory to terrorist organizations who then establish themselves in that territory and pose grave threats to Israel. But we were assuming that wouldn't happen. We leave the territories, and America comes in and adds more aid in order to strengthen our sense of security, right?
Sense
of
actual.
Security. Yes, I use that phrase very specifictically. And
it's therapeutic aid rather than military.
Meaning,
system.
it's possible that without that aid, Israel would never even allowed itself to go surrender the territories, or we would have kept on doing stupid army. It's not a smart army, right?
A stupid big army rather than a small, small
when
one.
Israel controlled Gaza before Oslo Accords, the most weapons they have was handguns, right? I'm telling you the specific officers that I've spoken to that served there at the time.
Yeah.
That's all there was. There was not even rifles, let alone
You mean
entire terror
for the
army.
Gazans?
Yeah, within Gaza when Israel was there.
In what's called the first Intifada, in the Palestinian riots of the 1980s, early 1990s, the most powerful weapon that Israelis used was an M16, and they walked around without protective gear, without helmets on.
Yeah, and not just that. If we mentioned the first Intifada, this was also a direct outcome of the Jibril deal, where we released thousands of terrorists into it.
You're right.
Right? I mean, it didn't have to happen like that, right? That was a result.
I'll just give my own little story, which was when I was in the Army. My unit, we went to Gaza for meetings one day, and they forgot me there because I was in a meeting with, some intelligence officer, and they didn't know where I was, and so they just left. So here's little Carolyn in Gaza, and I hitchhiked back to Tel Aviv alone, and it was bad. Like, I shouldn't have done that, and they should definitely not have left me alone in Gaza. But the fact is that can you imagine?
Yeah, that was the security situation.
That was the security situation
in Gaza, right? So, and then as we surrendered these territories and allowed terrorist armies to establish themselves there, then we faced graver threats of rocket threats. And terrorism from Judea and Samaria, right? And then we needed to develop defensive systems, ballistic defense systems. We throw thousands and thousands of dollars at stupid rockets in the Iron Dome, right? And we need more Iron Dome. Why do we need Iron Dome? Because we allowed terrorist armies to establish themselves on our borders, right? And so this all so let's say the reverse which is what we've been doing, or we're acting over the past year to reverse the situation. Right, and
we've done
retake territory, right? That now Israel, I think it's pretty clear that Israel is going to insist on having security control over Gaza in the next, the foreseeable future. I've argued that we should do the same thing, at least the first mountain ridge in southern Lebanon, as well. And at the very least, we've gone in and I think we are committed to making sure that Hezbollah will not reestablish itself in southern Lebanon. Exactly how we do it, I'm not sure yet. But we've sort of changed that equation. We're also changing it in Judea and Samaria, we really changed it in the Chomat Magen, Operation Defensive Shield, in 2002, where we went back into territories in Area A, which we had abandoned, allowed them to become terrorist strongholds. Right. So the three withdrawals are slowly becoming reversed, right? And is when Israel finishes doing this, and of course needs to finish the job with Iran. But even everything that we've done right now, we have created a much more improved security situation that we've been in for the past 20 years, right? And if we follow through, and we must follow through, right? Then I think it's very likely that, and of course, and we rebuild our army and rearm. Then we will have created an era of relative stability.
So that means that. So just to round this off, because we do have to finish. But what you're suggesting is that the new offensive defensive lines that Israel is taking, the active defense, a manned defense by human beings with guns, that is changing the security environment from one where the threats were multiplying every year to one where the threats are likely to be reduced from year to year, particularly if we do go through and take out Iran's nuclear installations. Because that enables the rebuilding. A nuclear deterrent will enable the rebuilding of all of the forces that we've decimated over the past 15 months. And so what we really need in terms of this MOU, if we end up deciding to go forward with it with the Trump administration, is to say, okay, this is a dynamic of the security situation along our borders. This is how we intend to maintain it and reduce the threats over time. And to this end, this is what we need to do. We need to rebuild our army after this prolonged conflict. And once we do that, once we're in this position, our need for assistance from you in any way is going to be massively reduced.
Right. I say it this way: we need to consolidate our achievements of the war and not fritter them away in some sort of deal. Right. We need to change the failed security concept and go back to, in many ways, what was the security concept that led Israel for its first 40 years, And by doing that, yes, we will not only have stabilized our own borders and our own security situation, we will have also have changed the entire balance of power in the region, right? From one which Iranian hegemony is becoming, more and more.
Chronic instability as a result.
Yeah, and chronic instability and proxy forces and all that, into a situation where Iran, its tentacles have been cut off. It's, under at the very least, maximum pressure, sanctions, and under threat of its nuclear program in the near term. Hopefully deal with it finally, right? And all of that will create a situation which is strategically in the U.S. interests, right? And create a stronger Israel. And this is the most broader conception of the way we need to approach this with the U.S. and Israel. That doing all this will allow the United States to focus on its bigger competitor, which is China. And that's what it wants to do. That's what the Trump administration wants to do. It doesn't want to be involved in the wars in the Middle East. And so the deal is that, okay, you don't want to do as much. You don't want as much forces on the ground, definitely not be dragged in. Fine, even great. Israel has now changed the balance of power in the way that can now be maintained, right? And all we need is political support, right? Political support that's not going to pressure us to further away our war gains, but rather consolidate them, lock them in, right? And then continue with that sort of forward assertive posture in the next in the next decade. And that will also be advantageous both to Israel, to the United States, and will also, I think, bring a spring back of Israel's economy, which will grow our GDP even more over the next decade. Again, we're talking till 2038 that we wouldn't be taking any more of the aid. By then, Israel's economy could continue to grow. Right now, it's not. This is the issue. When Israel's faced with constant rocket threats, why are foreign companies are going to think twice about opening up new facilities in Israel? Gas companies that want to look for additional natural gas that was to be found in the Mediterranean, or we're going to have Hezbollah can shoot at us and all that, right? And that's what's happening right now. But in a context where Israel has decisively been victorious over its enemies, and there is no more of this, constant rocket threat drizzle of rocket threats, what people used to call. And it's clear that Israel is a stable place that wins its wars and doesn't further away its victories. Then there is a huge there's a dividend. There's an economic dividend that will also off balance and offset the fact that we're going to have less coupons.
All right. Well, I think that I obviously, not obviously, but I've been advocating for this same outcome for many years, and I think that you make yet another convincing argument for it, right? That is to say all of this, to make these arguments before October 7th, when we were faced with this strategic predicament of being surrounded by Iranian proxies on all of our borders, armed with these increasingly sophisticated and powerful missiles that we had to defend against, was a different set of arguments than making the arguments now, when we're actually, God willing, winning the war in a very significant way, changing completely our defensive doctrine to one of active defense on the frontiers. And I think that it's a more persuasive argument in a way, both for Israeli ears and also for American ears.
Yeah, I think now it's a historic moment, and also I think within Israel, people are more open to the idea than ever before because of what we've seen over the past year, because of all the things that we talked about. And so, and I also think we have an American administration that is willing to work with us and reverse that equation. Right. The equation used to be America needs to pressure Israel to give up territory in order to have peace agreements and to balance its interest in supporting Israel with their interest in supporting Arab states. And so Israel has to give something up, and American offsets that by giving us a stronger sense of security, by giving us more stuff. And we need to reverse that equation. Whereas Israel creates its actual security, not a sense of security, but actual security, right? And therefore it doesn't need these offsets in terms of coupons. And we're also at a point where this doesn't even necessarily have to contradict America's relationship with the Arab world. Quite the opposite, right? And in some ways, Israel becoming a stronger, more dominant power in the region, it will facilitate our normalization with newer parts of the Arab world.
Not in some way, in a very direct way.
Right, in a very direct way. So I think all of the equations
massively decreases the United States' requirement to get involved. I mean, the more colonialist the Americans behave here, the more they have to be involved. The more supportive as an ally they are, the less they have, the more we can do ourselves without any involvement.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, I think that this has been an incredibly important one. And you wanted me to plug your book, so I will. This is his book. It came out in 2023. It's called Cultures of Counterproliferation: The Making of U.S. and Israeli Policy on Iran's Nuclear Program. It's really, it's a cliffhanger. Let me tell you. Let me tell you. This is...
It's a necessary reading to understand the situation we're in and how we got there.
And it's a cliffhanger. Yeah, you just can't wait to read the next small print. Anyway, I'm just kidding. It's a great important book, and I'll be reading it momentarily. And I appreciate very much Dr. Ben-Levy that you came here, Raphael, to join me on this program. And I think over time, as we see how things kind of take form with the Trump administration, we may have to revisit this issue. But in the meantime, I think that we've given everybody sort of a primer on where we are, what the stakes are, how we got here, and how we get past it.
Absolutely. So thanks again for inviting me.
All right. Thanks for having me, and I'll talk to you guys again later this week. Take care.